Arkansans Ask is underwritten by the Arkansas State Employees Association, Incorporated, an organization of state employees working toward the betterment of state government.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us. With a new school year in its earliest hours, what better time to assess where stands Arkansas's public education system? That system faces challenges, always has, always does, probably always will. How much money does it need to get the job done, and are we providing it? Including teacher pay. Higher, yeah, but high enough. The rise of the charter movement, does it imperil traditional classrooms? Providing Arkansas's youngsters with an adequate education is an Arkansas constitutional imperative, as affirmed by Arkansas's highest court. We'll spend the next hour on these and other issues, especially those issues you choose. Here to take your questions tonight, Johnny Key is Secretary of the State Department of Education. Carol Fleming is President of the Arkansas Education Association, the AEA. Jay Barth is the immediate past chair of the State Board of Education. Stacey McAdoo of Little Rock is 2019's Arkansas Teacher of the Year. And Senator Jane English is chairman of her chamber's Education Committee, and we thanks to everybody for coming in. Thanks also to our phone volunteers who are standing by to take your calls. Toll free, 1-800-662-2386. Email questions are, of course, very welcome. paffairs@aetn.org or Twitter at AETN #ARAsk. And again, thanks to everybody for coming in. I would start with this, and Secretary Key, we reorg. I'll start with you, and then I'd like to go down the line. Arguably, public education, the whole of it, K-12, pre-K-12, is better than it was 20 years ago. For whatever factors, can we say that it's better than it was 5 years ago?
Steve, I think we can. I think we are better with respect to teacher salaries. We are seeing an increase in the number of teachers coming in to preparation programs now. We are seeing greater opportunities provided to students at all levels. It's not consistent across the state, but I think where we are seeing great partnerships between the public sector and the private sector, we are seeing greater opportunities in career education now. And we are really seeing more of as we move into higher education, those kids that finish our system. I'll give you an example. We have over 800 students now across the state that qualify for Governor's Distinguished Scholarship. That's the highest levels of achievement. Just 10 years ago, we were at 300 or so. So there are greater opportunities. We are seeing some significant movement, and I think we are better than we were 5 years ago.
Carol Fleming.
I think we're on the road to becoming better than 5 years ago, but we still have teacher shortages all throughout the state, as well as I appreciate the fact that we've made some gains with our minimum teacher salary throughout the state, but there's still more to do with that because we don't want it to be a minimum salary, we want it to be a living salary, and that's something that we're hearing more and more from our educators throughout the state. You know, that salary increase is for the certified teachers, yet we have classified educators throughout the state that are having to work 2 and 3 jobs in order to make ends meet. And so while we're making gains, we still have shortages. We still don't have living wages. And we're working on professional development that is improving throughout the state, but we still have more that we can be doing in that area. And so we're making gains, but I don't believe that we're there yet.
Jay Barth.
Yeah, somewhat similarly. I mean, I think at the best, Arkansas's best public education systems are the best they have ever been in the history of the state. They are indeed, in many cases, about as good as it gets in the country, but I think the challenge is the inequities and the fact that when it comes to quality teacher pay, access to communities that are fully bought into those schools. We've got some communities that are really, really challenged. And I think that's the way in which I think the Lakeview era is not being fully lived up to. We're doing adequacy, I think, as a whole. What we're not doing is equity. And I think we've got a lot of accidents, a lot of things are driven by the accident of where a kid happens to be born, and that's just not appropriate under our Constitution, I think.
Mrs. McAdoo, you're on the front line.
Right, so rather than echoing and repeating everything that I just heard, I'll just kind of speak on it from a personal standpoint. I know that I am a more effective and better teacher today than I was 5 years ago. And
Why?
I think a lot of it has to do with the support that I have received, not just from my school building, but like you talked about, the community and the resources that I have personally received, which has allowed me to spread that wealth and impart my knowledge and the expertise in a different manner than I previously had. And I don't know if that really truly answered your question, but I would hope that every educator is better 5 years from now than they were 5 years ago.
Senator, you spend the money.
Oh, I wish.
Well, you appropriate. You send.
Johnny spends the
you
money.
send the money. Let me put it that way.
Yes, yes, and I think for all of us on our joint education committee, adequacy and looking at public education, charter schools, all kinds of education here in the state is really one of our primary responsibility, and we spend a lot of time doing that. It is, from my standpoint as a citizen, I honestly believe that we are looking different and we have a different attitude than we did 5 or 10 years ago about education. I think there's a more positive feeling around the state. I think that there is a better, I used to think education operated in its own bubble and inside of a building, and I think people are realizing that you have to have lots of stakeholders involved, because if you don't have those stakeholders involved, they're a resource. They're good ideas, they're good thoughts, and all of our students are going to have to go off and be part of the workforce and make a living here in the state, so they have to be part of all those stakeholders.
I'd like to come back to a couple of themes that some of you stressed a second ago, but first let's go to some questions from viewers, and already we've got some questions coming in. For example, how are we attacking the learning, which is reflected, it's improving in some respects, the learning gap between black students and white, but it's still there.
It is still there, and it's one of the most persistent challenges that we have. I think we are making gains. In the last few years, we have really, at the department, have put a lot of emphasis on improving the support to teachers, improving professional development, trying to create resources where teachers can tackle those challenges of, how do we close those achievement gaps between poverty and non-poverty, between black, white. We are seeing districts that are doing a good job with that, and what we try to do is take those districts and point them out as success stories for others to go and evaluate. Hey, what are you doing, and will that work for our community? So we're, as Carol mentioned, we're not where we want to be, but I think we are progressing on that particular issue.
Jay Barth.
Yeah, I think that we have done some closing of the gap. I mean, I think we've, especially at certain times, we've seen some major progress when it comes to English language learners, and we've done, I think, a very fine job as a state in some of our districts with the highest percentages of Latinx kids of really responding to the language learning needs there, and really done a good job. I think when it comes to poverty and race and the way in which they intersect, which is really a challenge, I think that in many of those communities there simply are not the resources. There is the deep care to make their kids' lives better, but there simply, in many cases, are not the resources to do that work that is so important between the community and the schools. And I do think that in certain cases, we could do much better in terms of preparing teachers culturally to respond to the diversity of students who are going to arrived in their classrooms this week, and I think we've done some good work there, but I think it's not comprehensive.
Ms. Fleming.
Yeah, and I would agree with Jay on that. We certainly are hearing, and as an educator who has just come out of a school, I have seen and I've witnessed firsthand that we have to have more cultural professional development for our educators, because that way we're better prepared for working with our students. But then there's also the inequities with the resources, and again, it does come back to the communities. Even in a school district, you're going to see inequities of resources depending on where that school is located. In some school districts, you have brand new schools that have state-of-the-art technology, but then you have other schools that are 40 to 50 years old that still have outdated technology, and you have textbooks that are still tattered and torn, whereas you have other schools or even school districts throughout the state that have Chromebooks, they have Nooks, they have Apple MacBook Pros that the students are utilizing. But then you have other students who have to go to the library and get on a freestanding computer, and then the internet is not always working. Right. So those are the things that we're experiencing in the schools even today. We're making gains, but it's those community resources that we don't always see for our students.
And I was just going to jump in there. And it was towards the beginning part of your question when you framed it as the achievement gap between this group and this group, specifically against minority communities, and you talked about poverty. I think the conversation should not necessarily be comparing the two different groups or the 3 or 4 different groups to one another. It should be comparing all students to the standard of excellence. It shouldn't be, is this group doing better than this group? Because that, as a person of color, that just doesn't sit well with me to be compared to my white counterparts or anyone else.
But it is one yardstick, though.
It is.
Ms. McAdoo.
It is.
It just leaps out, does it not?
I think at the end of the day, the gap is about opportunity and lack of opportunity, more so than it is about a black student versus a language learning student or anything. It's about what those children have access to or don't have access to, which does circle back into what you were talking about in regards to equity and how the resources are allocated. But that's a different conversation.
But is it really? Because all of you have talked about equity here. Every single one of you has mentioned equity. I didn't use the word. I think it started with Commissioner Key, or Secretary Key.
Well, if you look at graduation rates, which is still a very important yardstick for us to measure, we have seen over the last 4 years what was a double-digit gap between white students and African American students has now closed to single digit. I think it's around 7 points difference. Still too high. We want graduation rates to be in the high 90s for all student groups. But we are making progress, and that goes to the opportunities. So there are more opportunities now for students to have those really engaging learning experiences. And it is showing in that results like graduation rate across the state. So more work to do, but we want excellence for all students. That's probably the best thing that's been said so far tonight.
Yeah, everyone does, I think.
Well, and what I was saying, like you just quantitated it. You said 90% for all students. So if there is a group that is not meeting that mark, don't say that these kids are. Let's figure out how to get the kids that are not meeting the mark to meet it, because that's what it's about.
Yeah, in terms of equity or resources.
In terms of everything.
Sure, but you're from one of the more affluent districts in the state. Right now it's run by the state. Do you see do you have the resources you need? Can you get the job done?
It's very difficult, and that's where I talked about my support from the community. It's not necessarily what my district gives me. First of all, I am from the community in which I teach. So my personal network runs really deep, And those people are willing to pitch in, jump in, and do whatever it is that they can do to help me do what I need to do. So I have a whole community behind me, and I don't think it's because I'm in an affluent district, which I would beg to differ, but I don't think it's because I'm in that district. I think it's because of who I am in the community that I'm in and how that community is responding to my needs or the needs of the community, if that makes any sense.
I think.
And
Ms. Fleming, go ahead. Yeah.
And I'm from the same school district. And so I also do not agree that we are one of the more affluent school districts. When I was talking about the disparity between the resources, I'm referring to the disparity that I'm seeing in the schools in my personal district that I have witnessed, because we actually had Lily Eskelson Garcia, who's the president of the National Education Association. She came to Arkansas about 3 years ago, and she showed the differences between Forest Heights STEM and another one of our schools. The differences between Hall High School and what you also have over at Central High School. We have stark differences. You have the same thing even in Pulaski County Special School District. You have Robinson High School, and then you have Mills. And so, and as a soccer official, I have witnessed those differences that the students have had in regards to resources for their athletics and for their uniforms and for having the support of the community to come out and to support those activities and those events. So I have witnessed it firsthand in my district and then in other districts.
But that's inter-district allocation of resources, is it not?
But I think increasingly, I mean, to go back to Stacey's point, a lot of it is how invested the local community is and can be based on their energies. And I think we've increasingly, you know, in the past, I think we've seen, you know, education as these great change agents in a community. And schools can be important change agents in a community, but too often now they instead are just simply the reflection of the opportunities that are available in that local community. And I think that's what we're hearing. And in neighborhoods, you do have those kinds of true disparities in terms of the social capital and the community buy-in that is available.
Affluence. I think when you talk about affluence of a district, you look at it through multiple lenses. One lens is the student body, you know, that student population. And I don't think anybody would say that as a whole, the student body of the Little Rock School District is affluent. But if you look at it from a district perspective and the property valuations, you know, then the argument can be made it is affluent. Little Rock has over 12 mills over and above what the base level of operating. What you've had in Little Rock and in Central Arkansas in general is through the years of the DSEG, you had the extra money coming in. And one of the challenges for Little Rock has been, in Little Rock, North Little Rock, and Pulaski County, weaning off of that DSEG money, and then how to use those funds as they came in, and now with those gone, what's the effect? And so I think a lot of what our teachers are seeing is the effect of weaning off of those extra funds that were coming in. But Little Rock still has a strong fiscal foundation. Now, the distribution of those funds intra-district remains a focal point. And so I know that working with Mr. Poore, his goal is to make sure that each building gets what they need to meet the needs of those students. And it does vary, because the students in one part of the district need something far greater than students in another part of the district. So it's an ongoing challenge, not just in Little Rock, but in other parts of the state.
Thank you, Secretary. We're going to go to some questions here with more, and here's one from, I believe, Pulaski. With more and more K-12 teachers entering or approaching retirement age, if not outright retirement, what incentives, what are we doing to recruit qualified replacements, a new generation of teachers?
That's one of the greatest areas of partnership, I think. In the last several years, we have increased the number of schools that have teacher cadet programs. These are programs so students who look forward to becoming a teacher or are interested in that can start that pathway in high school. We have seen that grow to, we expect, over 100 schools in Arkansas to participate, up from less than 40 just a few years ago. We expect over 1,000 students to be members of teacher cadet programs, partnerships with the teachers' organizations, partnerships with local communities. So we are really working to not just that for the beginning instructor or beginning teachers, but also teachers that have left at the department. We're trying to lower the barriers to having them re-engage and come back in. So we saw about 700 teachers, I believe, 2 years ago that came in through a re-engagement effort that we went out. We're going to do that again this year. So I really think tackling that, engaging those folks, making the barriers lower to re-licensure, that if they've already been licensed, how they get their license again. Those are things that we are doing actively to make those, fill that hole in the pipeline.
Ms. McAdoo, probably your associates hope you teach for another 1,000 years, but, and presumably some of your students do. Anyway, when you talk with your fellow teachers, particularly the young ones coming into the system now, beginning their careers in education, what are they telling you? What do you hear from them?
Well,
Why did they choose it? How can we keep them?
Most of the educators that I know who chose to be an educator chose to do it either because some educator inspired them or because they wanted to be something that they didn't have. Both instances are ultimately about providing a solid foundation for students to be the best, to discover how to be the best that they can be. But I do think that in terms of how we can recruit and retain teachers, if we did things such as offer free childcare. I remember how expensive it was for me when I had children, and if I did not have an aunt who was able to watch my kids, there's absolutely no way that I could have worked and afforded childcare. I also think that we could do other things, other types of benefits that could help lower the cost. Healthcare. I'm non-traditional, so I came from the workforce into education, and my health insurance, and this is kind of dating me, but at the time I paid approximately $20-something a month for my family, and when I came into education, it was $300-something 20 years ago for me to pay that. So think healthcare, childcare. Those are probably two of the biggest things that you could do to help recruit and retain young people specifically who are wanting to have a living wage with a family and work.
I do think we've made some great strides. I think Secretary Key points them out. I think we have here and there done some good jobs of elevating the profession. I mean, I think you're a good example of that in the way in which we highlight that program in the state. I do think that we need to do more of that. We need to empower teachers through providing them the kind of professional development they need at that time. I think we do have some laws in place regarding professional development that probably are not exactly responsive to the most needs of teachers. The one thing I was concerned about when I was on the state board is that, especially in the most challenged district, we are on occasion providing waivers from credentialing that I think are really troubling, both in terms of what the immediate impact is on the kids in those classrooms, but more importantly, what the way in which the teaching profession is seen as a true profession. And I think anything that we do that is a shortcut is a real problem. It's a really tough challenge, though, because you have lots of districts where this week there probably were not teachers in front of some classrooms. And so how do we do that? I do worry a lot about giving districts waivers that allow them to shortcut, and I think at the end of the day that's something that probably has dire ramifications for the way the profession is perceived.
Yeah, Ms. Fleming?
I concur with what's already been said.
Here's another question. Excuse me, it comes from Faulkner County. The importance of grade level reading in Arkansas. I think we've kind of touched on this, but we can hit it again.
It's the foundation.
Are we showing significant, are we really getting traction on that particular issue?
Well, are we seeing huge gains? No, not yet. But we're tackling that from the long game standpoint, where we started our RISE initiative. We're just going into the 3rd year of that, and we started with our K-2, really focusing on changing the way we teach reading in the state of Arkansas. That has to go back into our educator prep programs to change the way they teach teachers how to teach reading in the state of Arkansas. So in the schools where we see that implementation be effective, then we are seeing gains. We're doing the training, we're getting the programs out there. Now we need the school administrators, we need the superintendents to back that up, reinforce that, to make sure the materials that are the right materials for the RISE initiative are in the classrooms, that teachers have them at their fingertips. Grade level reading is the most important thing, because without that, you stay behind. We know of high school kids that come into the 9th grade at a 4th grade reading level. They are not prepared for that high school level, that secondary level material, and to be able to succeed at that level. So that's one of the department's greatest focus areas is on grade level reading. And we think in the next 5 to 10 years, we are going to see dramatic shifts. Right now it's incremental, but I'd say over the next several years you're going to see some big improvement in that area.
The central core, I don't want to single out reading, but although I think Secretary Key basically just did, and I think most educators would too. If a child can read well, sky's the limit. If not, the curve, the trajectory is way down. Jay Barth.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with that. We all know that there reaches a point in the educational process where it's most important to have reading skills to continue to learn across the board. I think the one thing I do worry a little bit about is the focus on reading after the 3rd grade in particular is, I think, distracting from some of the variety of educational opportunities that need to be present for kids. So for instance, I remember visiting what was described as a social studies class at a school, very challenged school. But it was a class where it was really all about literacy skills. And my fear is that where kids are losing some of the amazing variety of educational opportunities when there is so much focus on literacy too late in the game. We need to get it right early and then allow education to flourish so that kids can really see the variety of opportunities that are out there. So that's the one worry I have right now, and it's not to denigrate the need to get it right early, but I do think we are often bogging down some of our educational experiences with so much focus in the later grades because we've made mistakes early on.
I think ultimately the point of education is to teach students how to think. And I think back to...
Make them hungry.
Just think critically and creatively. If you can do that, then that's what it takes to be successful in the world. And I think back to my grandfather. He didn't know how to read, but he was hugely successful because he was a thinker. He was able to read in a different way. He didn't read the words, he read the world around him, and that's because he was a thinker. So if we can figure out how to create thinkers, then all the rest of that will fall in place.
Let me do this real quick and then I'll come back to the panel. Wanted to mention that AETN offers professional development courses to K-12 teachers across the state, and we have a look now at some of the programs that are offered.
For 12 years, Arkansas Ideas has delivered engaging professional development to educators throughout Arkansas. In 2005, Arkansas passed Act 2318, partnering the Arkansas Educational Television Network and Department of Education to provide educational content to even the most remote Arkansas communities. Since then, Ideas has provided over 600 content courses to over 58,000 Arkansans, earning more than 2.8 million credit hours. Just in 2019, Ideas has covered a wide variety of topics. In Hour 8 of The Science of Reading, University of New York professor Dr. David Kilpatrick explores how word-level reading and sight vocabulary work and what effective instruction for struggling students looks like. In Sudden Cardiac Arrest When Seconds Count, Dr. Don Steely and several Arkansas athletic trainers discuss warning signs, prevention methods, and field techniques to save a student in cardiac arrest. This summer, the Arkansas Department of Education held a 4-day summit in Hot Springs. The summit covered topics like computer science, dyslexia, school health, and others in one comprehensive week. Arkansas Ideas streamed over 24 hours of summit presentations, allowing educators across the state access to first-class professional development. We are also focused on digital content to be used in the classroom. With Morphology Minute and Sound It Out, we provide fun and informative videos on how to form and correctly pronounce words. Arkansas Ideas isn't simply a tool for educators. Our digital series allow us to tell community stories that are going untold. Through Cool Schools, Heart of a Teacher, and Books and Breakfast, we highlight programs and communities going above and beyond to inspire the next generation. Arkansas Ideas is just getting started. With hours of content and production, we're proud to help build a brighter future for Arkansas.
And to see more on what Ideas has to offer, you can go to ideas.aetn.org. You don't even have to be a teacher or an educator to go there. Ms. Fleming, back to you. I cut you off a minute ago and I didn't mean to.
It is okay. It's not the first time I've been cut off. Probably won't be the last time. But I wanted to also chime in about the reading program with RISE that we have. Over the years that I've been an educator, I've seen many reading programs come in and out of the schools. We've had Reading Renaissance, we've had Star Reading, we've had Read 180, we've had the Scottish Rite reading programs that have been implemented in the schools. And so it seems like RISE is the new program of choice. And how long are we going to, so I've already named 4 in my 20 years that I've been in the schools that we've been utilizing. And so, and I'm sure there's another one that I've missed, but how long are we going to use RISE? And are we going to see the progress that we're anticipating with it? Yes, it is now something that is statewide, which the others have been, school districts have been able to choose what they've implemented. This one, we are being asked, in order to maintain our teaching certification, that we have to go through this training. But I'm just cautious having another new program, and is this truly going to be the answer to the reading issues that we're facing with our students?
Are you cautious or are you skeptical? And I don't, here's the commissioner standing, or the secretary sitting right by you, but anyway, what?
I'm just cautious, just because we have had others, which I guess then also does bring in that skepticism, but
and that's fully, I understand that. We all at the department, we understand it. I mean, our staff have been in the classroom. The members of our team are people who have lived exactly what Carol is talking about. What gives me hope, and I think, Senator, you're about to talk about hope. What gives me hope is those members of the department team who have been reading teachers, who have had the 20+ years experience, they see this and they recognize the missing pieces that RISE has that wasn't available in their classroom experience. And so that's feedback that we get directly from teachers. We're getting that I had a superintendent at the last state board meeting. He said the RISE training is the best professional development that he had ever been through in all of his years in education, because he saw that it was going to have an impact on his students. So understand the skepticism, don't fault anybody for that, but personally I'm hopeful. And how long will it last? As long as I'm commissioner / secretary, that's how long, and hopefully far beyond that.
Okay, let me go to another view, and it has to do with RISE and reading skills, but this one's from Faulkner County. There apparently is a correlation, or so says the caller, the viewer, a correlation between the skills of the library, whether it's a certified librarian, and whether a student has access to a library that is staffed by a qualified, trained, certified librarian can make a significant difference. Do you concur with that, Ms. Fleming?
Oh, I believe so, yes. We definitely need to have our certified librarians, library media specialists manning those libraries. Because they're teaching classes in those libraries. I mean, the library has become a classroom, and classes are coming in, and the classroom teacher isn't the one who's doing the lesson in the library. It is your librarian who is conducting the classes in the libraries, and that's why we have nationally board certified teachers who are librarians, because they are going through that process and they're teaching those classes.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And one worry I've had, I talk a lot about waivers. My colleagues on the state board got really tired of me, kind of being skeptical about waivers of teacher credentials, but it's our school standards, and this is one of the most common waivers we've had, is to allow schools to either have a smaller number of librarians, et cetera, because it's the teaching of the classes, it's also the selection of the materials, because while there are certainly scientific elements to reading is ultimately, at the end of the day, there's artistry to that, and having the variety of materials that are going to turn a kid onto the love of reading and therefore the love of learning. And librarians know how to choose those materials when they're trained well.
And I'm sitting here smiling because when you brought up the question of librarians, it made me think of one of my favorite people of all time. Her name is Mrs. Bonner, and she's a librarian, but she wasn't in the school. She was a librarian in the Central Arkansas Library System in my neighborhood. And she was the one that introduced me to books that were not in my library at my school, books that looked like me, books that were of interest to me. So if you're watching, Ms. Bonner, hey.
So, Senator English, part of the adequacy argument, again, getting those trained, skilled, certified educators, including librarians, making sure they're in every district.
And I think that's part of the discussion. I think for everybody, adequacy, people worked really hard some years back to develop that funding formula, and I think probably now we're beginning to look at some of the things that we're doing now that we weren't doing 15 years ago, and some of the issues that are out there today that were not around. Mental health, we didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about school safety. We didn't talk about some of these other things. So I think there's, from my standpoint, and I hope from the rest of our committee, it's looking at the whole of where are we going. But I see some really tremendous things happening. When we talk about reading, I grew up with phonics. I mean, it was not a problem to learn a new word because you could sound it out. For years, I never thought kids were getting that same kind of education, and you wonder, so no wonder we don't have good reading scores. But we base everything on reading and math scores. So hopefully all those scores are going to go up. But you just look at the number of things, look at the professional development, the number of things that are new in schools that we've never had before, which hopefully is giving kids and teachers an opportunity to think about a whole new world that they've never had that chance to think about. I love it for kids to be able to think there are greater opportunities out there, just because they're exposed to more.
I won't call it the elephant in the room, but perhaps some viewers are thinking or wondering, when we're going to address that. And that's state control, Mr. Secretary of the Little Rock School District. Everyone here has practically everyone has mentioned, particularly McAdoo, community support, community buy-in, and Mr. Barth as well, Dr. Barth as well, community buy-in, community support. When can that district regain control?
So just today, we announced the state board will be having public input meetings. There'll be 3 of those coming up over the next 3 Tuesdays. And that's an opportunity for Little Rock residents, members of the community, to come and give input on what the next steps could look like for Little Rock. We are nearing the 5-year deadline that's in statute for a district to be what used to be academic distress. That is the old accountability system. Under the new accountability system, it's in need of level 5 support. Little Rock School District is in that status. But at the end of 5 years, the state board has to take certain action. in annexation, consolidation, or reconstitution. What annexation, consolidation, those two options are not practical for a district the size of Little Rock. So really the opportunity for the public is to say, what does reconstitution look like? Before Dr. Barth left the board, the number of the members expressed interest in having opportunities for public input on that, and that's what will be coming up over the next few weeks.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that there have been real costs to long-term state control in terms of community buy-in into the schools. We saw it most clearly in a vote for extension of the millage a couple of years ago, which lost badly in the district, and in particular it lost very badly in precincts in the Little Rock School District, which had historically voted overwhelmingly for taxes for schools, and it was about this sense of loss in trust because of the loss of local control. And while I am someone who is actually somewhat critical of local control at times because it can run amok, and over the history of our state has run amok.
Well, it gave us Lakeview, as a lot of people.
That's right, and there is something very real about folks being able to have representation in the folks who run their schools, and it's been a real challenge. And I think in particular in Little Rock, because of the distinctive nature of the community, the divisions within the community, and the mistrust that is present in much of the community because of its history, I think it becomes even more relevant there. And so it was a challenge. It's been a challenge all along, and it's time. It's time for local control to return, recognizing the state has an ultimate constitutional responsibility to be sure that those schools are improving.
Ms. McAdoo, you talked about the emotional support that you have received as an educator in the district. You received that in spite of the state takeover, or what? Give me your sense of it as a classroom teacher.
I don't know.
And then we'll go to Ms. Fleming.
It's probably in spite of, because of, but it was also prior to. And I think again, it's just about relationships, and it's the relationships that are already in place, and the nature of what I do. I am an avid teacher, which I run a college readiness program for students who typically are underserved and underrepresented at a traditional college. So there are lots of people who want to see those students succeed, and they support us. But in terms of local control and local support, yes, my community wants local control returned. I feel as though we are basically being taxed without representation, and that sentiment is real, and there's a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, and they're ready for it to not be reconstituted or annexed or any of those things. They want it returned.
Ms. Fleming?
And I would agree, both of them have articulated very well the same issues that I have experienced within my school, also in the Little Rock School District. But then the other thing is morale, because you have decreased morale amongst the educators, the staff within the schools, within the community, because even the community leaders, the morale is low because we know that we have been under state control for 4.5, almost 5 years, and we know that deadline is looming, and so people are anxious. And yes, we are ready to have local control brought back to our communities.
Mr. Key, how likely are they to get it?
Well, the statute clearly outlines what the state board's options are, and I mentioned those three. So reconstitution is to be determined of what a return to local control could look like. So certainly the input sessions, I think, will give us a lot of information that we'll compile, and the state board will have those conversations. But I don't envision a long-term continuation of state authority for that district. I mean, there will be a time, and it needs to be a time when that's restored. I can't give you a timeline or what it looks like. That's what the next several weeks will help inform us on how we move forward.
Well, a lot of people in the district would argue 4.5 years, that's plenty long.
Well, I think
is it a better district because the state is running?
I could certainly name a number of positive things. A new middle school in West Little Rock. We'll open a brand new high school in Southwest Little Rock in 2020. There have been a number of other improvements made to other schools in the district. This year we were able to, with the funds, Governor Hutchinson and the General Assembly, with the increase to the minimum teacher salary, taking those funds and giving Little Rock School District teachers a raise, base level raise for the first time in I don't know how many years, a number of years. So there have been a number of positive things that have happened, and you have to remember too, the state board action that took place in 2015 was under an accountability system that was tied to No Child Left Behind, tied to only proficiency numbers on the old Arkansas benchmark exam. We've transitioned to higher standards. We've transitioned to a higher level of exam now, statewide assessment. So really to compare where we were then and where we are now you really can't make that direct comparison because so much has changed.
Another subject that I want to get to, and that is, it actually comes from a viewer with an advanced degree in education who asked how much is the department, and I would amend that to say, let me compress it, are we overemphasizing vocational paths as opposed to the traditional liberal arts holistic approach to education?
No.
Well, that's one of your specialties, Senator.
Absolutely not. I mean, in my mind, and I'm a citizen, got kids, grandkids. I would want to hope that my children and my grandchildren are getting the kind of education that gives them the education and the skills to be able to go off and have a productive rest of their life, whether it's a career or whether it's going to college, whatever that case may be. They all need those same kinds of basic skills, but I think it's important for all of our kids to have an opportunity to think about what they might want to be, what they might want to do. Give them some hands-on experience at trying some different things. I think it doesn't matter whether you're going to college or not. Everybody needs those kinds of things. And the literacy is part of it, math is part of it, social studies is part of it, everything is part of that. I think we have kind of turned a corner, I hope, over the last few years on making a greater emphasis on professionalism, whatever that is, whatever that happens to be.
Because the truth of I'm sorry, I said I was going to stop talking and I won't.
Teacher of the Year.
Well, the truth of the matter is that less than 20% of Arkansans have a college degree. So we have to place emphasis on professionalism and the skills that will ensure that they are able to have a fruitful life. And that may not necessarily be the college path, even though this is something that I wanted to plug. About 43 to 44% of educators have advanced degrees, and I find that very interesting that the most educated profession is one of the least financially compensated professions. You didn't ask the question, so I had to slide that
Well,
one.
I saw it coming, though. Anyway,
So first off, as somebody who's taught at a liberal arts institution for 25 years, I think it's a false choice between liberal arts education and vocational education. I think, and I do worry a bit about vocational education in terms of too much of a focus on the first job rather than a focus on lifelong learning and the ability to adjust. As we know, in a 21st century economy, we are all going to have a variety of jobs.
So I think that's probably one of the most critical things as we start helping people to understand lifelong learning. And that kids need to understand it doesn't stop when you get out of high school, it doesn't stop when you're out of the 7th grade. You know, it's a continuous process because the world is changing and we have so many fantastic opportunities. I don't want any of our kids to lose out because they haven't had the education, the skills to be able to take advantage of those what I think are tremendous opportunities for the future. all of our kids.
Yeah, the senator made a good point. That it is different now. I think a few years ago there was a clear distinction between jobs that were considered career and technical and jobs that were, college pathway required. Career education now is college. I remember even back in the 90s when I was working in an assembly plant, and a number of the people who were technicians, when they went back to get education, they went to the community college to get that, and they were getting programming skills. They were getting a lot of technical skills. Those are things we can do in our high schools now. And it's not to put students on a pathway to a locked-in career and technical job. It's a pathway of having skills that cross all the different components of careers out there now. Most people aren't going to be in the same career their entire life. They're going to move, they're going to change locations, they're going to change types of jobs. We have to get them prepared for jobs we don't know what they will look like in 5 years and 10 years. But I think those skills are cross-cut all of those areas, and that's why I don't think we're putting too much emphasis on career and technical education, because really you see the lines have blurred considerably over the last 5 to 10 years.
I think there's a tendency for people to think it's an either or,
right.
That you either go into the workforce because you're going to be a plumber or you go to college. But the reality is, given some options and some information, sometimes people are at some place when they're 18 and this is what they're going to do. When they're 24, they've seen what that bigger world is out there and realize they need more education. And it may be a college, but it may not. It may be something in between.
Or it may be even that one of the reasons that I worked at the place that I worked intentionally was because they offered tuition reimbursement.
That's right.
And so my first job was a way for me to get to college, to get to the career that I wanted to have.
Right.
Let me go to another subject because I want to get this in, and we've had several calls on this, and I'll try to boil it down. And that it doesn't take a doctor to know that a kid with an empty stomach is not going to learn as well. So and there's great disparity, I think, statewide in what is provided youngsters for breakfast and lunch to just the protein or the carbs, whatever that kid needs to do well that day in school. Can that be leveled anyway? Is the state doing its part? How much of this should accrue to the district? What, Secretary Keith?
Well, I think where you may have seen disparities a few years ago, those disparities are being eliminated. More and more districts are providing breakfast. Lunch has been a staple of school for for decades. But regardless, even affluent districts are understanding they have kids that need that breakfast, that for whatever reason they come to school hungry. So really it's being tied less to poverty and more of a community approach to providing those meals, and not just meals, but food that can go home with kids. So backpack programs, the No Kid Hungry campaign has done a great job. So I really think we have moved a great deal over the last several years with respect to providing those needs for students.
And because I talked about this up top, charter schools. Jay Barth, start with you.
Well, I think I think it's important to recognize that in much of Arkansas, charter education is not particularly relevant. It is primarily an urban, suburban, really an urban phenomenon. So that means in a very rural state, there are not that many places where there is a true vibrant charter option, because in rural Arkansas, transportation is essential to getting to school. I think what we're seeing is, unfortunately, I think in Northwest Arkansas, I think it's fair to say we are seeing some truly innovative options being created. The charter authorizing group looked at one this week that I thought was quite innovative in terms of responding to needs of kids who face trauma in their lives. I think too often in some of the more urban areas in Pulaski and Jefferson County, we are not seeing truly innovative options in terms of charter education. We're seeing charter schools that tend to replicate what should be happening in traditional public schools, and I think would be more feasible, more likely to happen if those traditional public schools had more of those resources. So that's my worry, is that we're not seeing as much innovation when it comes to charter education as we as the model promises.
Yeah, Ms. Fleming?
Well, and the other thing with charter schools is that we're not seeing the transparency that we should, the accountability and the transparency with the charter schools. Also, many of your charter schools, they have waivers and they do not have certified educators in the classroom for the students, and so that's a concern with charter schools. And then I want to add real quick about the breakfast in the classroom that you have up in Northwest Arkansas, and then Cabot Schools is now offering free breakfast and lunch for all students. It's not just your free and reduced students who have to apply for that. And I would love to see that more statewide, to have the free breakfast and lunch for all students rather than having to apply for it, and then it's based on that need. Everybody needs that food, and so they should all be afforded the free breakfast and lunch in the classroom.
Only about a minute remaining, or even less. Mr. Secretary, I'll give it to you, though. Charters versus traditional K-12, a threat?
It's not an either or, it's not a zero-sum game. The charter law that we have in Arkansas, it does talk about innovation, but it also talks about providing choice. So in some of these cases where maybe you don't see innovation, you see replication, that still fits within the public policy of our state. Do I see it as a threat? No, I see it as choice for families to be able to get what they need for their particular students. The transparency issue, believe me, they are under as much scrutiny in the state of Arkansas as a traditional public school. Last year we shut 2 down because of lack of performance or because of financial issues. So to think that there's some grand proliferation of charter schools in the state, the numbers don't bear that out. So I have a little different opinion than some of my friends here, but I think we're well balanced at this point with where we are in the charter versus traditional school.
They only gave us an hour, so I have to end it there, although we could go for another 4 or 5 or 6, and maybe we can pick it up again next time. I hope you'll all come back. Thank you for watching. See you next time.
Arkansans Ask is underwritten by the Arkansas State Employees Association, Incorporated, an organization of state employees working toward the betterment of state government.